Howdy peeps, how's it going today? It's Carpo here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some principles of life inspired by Alan Watts. I mentioned Alan Watts in a video I did the other day, and a couple people said, oh, I've never heard of him, I'll check him out. And I thought about it, and I thought back to all the processes that I've been through in my mind, all the different growth, all the different failures and successes that I've had in trying to understand the world around me as best as possible. And I've realized that it takes time to understand truth. And that seems pretty obvious. With age comes wisdom. But merely getting older doesn't always bring us closer to understanding our lives better. Only if we work towards it. So to give you an example, when you're young, people say, get out there and try a bunch of different jobs. Try different things, try art forms, try jobs, whatever moves you. And of course everyone knows that nobody's going to choose all the jobs. The reason we do that is so we can see and feel out what works for us. I would urge people to take that same approach to religion as well. There's nothing wrong with jumping around between religions. I would also urge people to do that in politics, to jump around from left to right and in the middle and look at where you stand on things and really try to understand and get the whole encompassing idea of what life means. And in that process you'll find that it's not about being right. It's about living right. And sometimes that's more complicated than just making a decision or following what somebody else said. One of the things that Watts mentioned, and I was listening to earlier, is he said nobody wants to become a god. Nobody wants that responsibility. He used an example, it's a perfect story, of a guy who gets a job as a farmhand, and the first day they have the farmer tells the guy, hey, all right, well, it's your first day on the job, how about you come over here and you clean off all these saddles, whatever it was. And he comes back at the end of the day and they're all completely done in like a few hours. Wow, he's a fast worker. The guy shows up the next day and he's like, all right, I need you to pound in all these fence posts. It'll take you a while. And comes at the end of the day and he's got every single one of them done. And he's like, wow, this guy's really good. So he's like, what am I going to have him do? And the next day the guy shows up. He says, all right, so here takes him in the basement. He says, these are the potatoes we harvested. You need to make a pile of the ones that go to market, and then a pile of the ones that go in the trash. And at the end of the day, the guy comes out, he's like, I got the potatoes done, I'm quit, I'm never coming back to this job again. The farmer's like, wait, I can't lose you, you're a great employee. He's like, what's wrong? And he said, look, I can pound in fence posts or clean saddles, but this potato thing is decision after decision after decision. And I loved it, I just loved it. There is a limited amount of willpower and decisive nature that we have within our minds. So if we are to choose many different paths or try to explore many avenues, we're going to get fatigued by that. And in fact, in each day they've shown now that we have a certain amount of willpower that we can expend and we just give up. And even within each time increment, I think it's like 15 minutes of effort before you start to kind of burn out on something. And we can force ourselves into it longer. But so back to the idea that nobody wants to be a god. That was based on the idea of what do we even want as people. And it's kind of an opposite idea of what Nietzsche said about, the will to power. The idea that, well, I won't get into that, but the idea that Watts was talking about was having more power, of course, comes more responsibility. But we see those who have power and prestige around us, and we assume that's natural. We should seek that. And then when we do, we find ourselves more miserable. And I want to use an example, which of course is a stereotype, and not accurate to every situation. But how many times have you seen an interview or on TV or a show with an older couple, senior citizens that have had a relationship for a long time, and you see the couple, the rich couple that lives the luxurious lifestyle with a lot of responsibilities and businesses. And then you see the humble couple that lives, say, up in the mountains, where they run maybe a rescue operation for animals, or they farm themselves. Who seems happier? And I know that seems short-sighted, but it's not. It's something that I've perceived my whole life. It shows me that with power and with more responsibility and more obligations does not come more happiness, of course. For some people, that's what they seek. But what Bas was saying was that all of that seeking of power is really a failure at love, a failure to have true love in our lives and true connection. Because real connection with people is satisfying beyond anything that we could find in any type of external world. And it's not that we're finding this in the other people. We're finding it within ourselves to connect with these other people on a level to where we give a part of ourselves up. Because in order to be in a relationship of any type, you have to be willing to bend. And some people are not willing to bend at all. So therefore, they consider everyone else the enemy, that everyone else is the dumbass, and that they figure, well, I guess I can only count on myself. And I feel like once we have got to that point, we've missed the point. And we're missing out on a huge component of what life has to offer. It might not just be failure to love. It can also be a loss of love. And maybe you lost a loved one and then sought a new path through, distracting yourself with more power, whatever it might be. But I thought of this term like, think things through thoroughly. I was like, that goes for everything. That means something I learned 20 years ago. I had to go extreme in one direction and then extreme in the other direction before I could find a happy medium. And I'm learning as I go, you can't rush these things. They all take time and a willingness to understand. The reason why they're so important is because if I was out seeking power right now, instead of seeking connection and understanding in my own life, then I might be leading myself down a path that is not suitable. When you look at the animal kingdom, sure, there are pack leaders in certain animal groups. So a person could say, well, it's human nature to have alphas, and none of that really matters. It's not about whether we need leaders or not. It's a matter of, do you want to be a leader or do you want to be a boss? You see what I mean? Some people love control, and giving up that control, you don't lose anything. You have nothing but gain from leaving behind the idea that you need to control every situation and every person. Hell is a choice, is the way I see it. Hell is a choice of the way we live right now on this planet. And hell on earth is usually, it seems to be derived from pursuing pleasures beyond what we deserve or what we need. It's an unfortunate side effect is when people pursue pleasure too long, it loses its luster, and they will start pursuing pain. Sadists, masochists. People find excitement. Really, it's novelty. You call it whatever you want. But connection and trust in other people is really the ultimate good that we can work for. If you have people that trust you and people that you trust in your life, I mean, that's the most rewarding experience. He used a raft metaphor for meditation and spiritual practices, and I thought this was a good one. He says some people get really hung up on meditation or the idea of a certain particular practice. I need to meditate or do this. And that meditation is more or less meh for some people. Maybe it's useful, but there's no particular way. He said too many people don't realize that meditation and spiritual practices are like a raft. You get down to the river, the raft is there. You use the river to get across, or you use the raft to get across the river, and then you leave it on the other side. You don't carry it with you across the land. And in the same way, when we try something that works, we should not get attached to it. So the opposite of seeking power and desire is seeking understanding within the self, and that can become just as addictive and attractive. This is how we get, massive groups of followers behind one person that claims to tell you this is how you're going to find your truth, as I mentioned before. He talked about it as the revolving door. It's like you're never finished. It's as if we're always continuously, what's the next thing, and how can I move up in this world, and spirituality becomes a ladder, or instead of just a tool, which you can. And there's a funny thing he mentioned. He said that for some people, they can use the raft and move on. And for others, they see the person and say, oh, you just didn't get it. You didn't understand the message. You need to come back to the river and, understand the message before. And the person's like, oh, I can't explain to you what I've learned from my experiences. This is kind of like a person who maybe goes from being an average Joe to dressing in full garb in order to define who he is, and then going back to just being an average Joe. And nobody's going to see what's truly in his heart. But he knows it, and he has the confidence to understand that. We do want to reflect how we feel in our hearts, but we can't always do that satisfactorily. I get misunderstood all the time, and that's fine. I do the best I can to be as expressive and understanding as I can, so I can relate to other people, because I get more satisfaction relating to other people than to telling them to just piss off and not dealing with, understanding, like I said. That connection of giving up a little bit of yourself to say, okay, we may not agree, but they're not the enemy. There's terms like samadhi, which is like awakening, or a satori. There's the bodhisattva, which is like the, escaping the life cycle. And all of that to me is just triviality. For my life in the Western world, what really matters is that connection to people. Nobody else can give it to you. Nobody else can tell you how to get it. Nobody else can give you the truth. And that's frustrating for a lot of people. A lot of people do not want to hear that. They don't want to think that we can't, find a path that has been laid out before us. With so many millions of people, billions of people living, somebody must have come up with a good answer to the questions that we might have. And it's not about coming up with answers to those questions so much as learning to stop asking the questions. There's the one riddle, the main riddle, the big riddle. It's deep within each one of our hearts and souls, minds, whatever you want to define it as. Regardless of what science, spirituality, religion tells us, there's something that we all feel deep down inside there, that mystery that we know. It's the ineffable, the inexpressible, something you can't define, and something you'll never be able to define. And without that mystery, life would just be laid out before us. And that is where the whole idea of free will and determinism comes from. To me, a deterministic future is a useless one. But free will just seems to be natural. Regardless of how we view it, here we are making decisions. So I'll leave it there. I had a couple other things I might talk about later, but for this video, it's got kind of long already. To inspire each other not to seek so much power for the sake of power, but if you're going to seek power, do it for the sake of helping others. But don't become so pious that we end up thinking that we've figured something out and everybody else is wrong. It's a complicated life. Talk to you all later.